All right, Happy New Year. This is the first database team meeting of the year, so jump right into it. At the end of last year, like 2 weeks ago, we talked about setting aside a time in these meetings, either Tuesday or Thursday, to review the database issues on the InfraDev board, and wanted to sync up with Jose and figure out what time, what day works best for you so that we can make sure it's a consistent time for you. So that if you need to go because you have some other high priority issues to work on, that you can go and we have a reliable time for you instead of like having it at the end of every meeting and having it move. So to Jose, what's the best time and day of the week to review these? Is it Tuesday? Is it Thursday? Do you want it at the beginning of the meeting? Do you want it at half hour from now? We'll work it around your schedule, whatever works best for you.
Sounds good for me. Can be in the beginning of the meeting here on the Tuesdays.
Okay. All right. I'll make it a part of the schedule then. So then on to the next question. So what is the best source that we should look at from the InfraDev side? We have a couple of links. So I have this one here. And then there was one up at the top. So which one should we use to take a look at?
I understand this one better. Like I see the select statements that we created.
Okay.
And usually I check, I know the issues because they are on the Epic, on the 365, but.
Okay. So we'll use this one. And then the next question, maybe we can filter it down even further. So we're only looking at new ones. Update this link here. When we're looking at these issues, how do we look at them and know that they've been triaged? Like if they're in a milestone, can we effectively ignore them so we're not triaging them again? Or how do we know that they've already been triaged? What kind of agreement should we come to there?
Well, what's the understanding when it has a version there that will be tackled or like will be solved or approached in that version, in that sprint, or what's the understanding?
So I can say what my experience is in Geo with triaging those. So the first thing that usually happens is everybody agrees on a priority and severity, and they have defined meanings as to when these are actually supposed to be addressed. Right? If it's a P1, it's essentially do it now. If it's a P2, it's this like within the next 1 or 2 releases. Right. So what we usually do is we leave a comment in the issue saying, this is the severity and priority. We understand, what this is. And from that is essentially, from that point is a commitment as to when we will address them. And I think when that is clear, we can assign a milestone to them and say, okay, this P2 is going to be in that milestone. And maybe for Craig, we can apply a deliverable to them, because then we are essentially saying we're going to do this. I think the important thing there for me is sometimes things are labeled in a specific way, but you don't quite know, if it's really that bad or not, right? So there may be a little bit investigation up front needed to actually say, this is, this is the correct labels. And I think that is part of the triage that we are committing to doing essentially weekly or whenever. So, but I would actually put a comment into the issue and say, like, we've done this, this is what we're going to do, so you can back reference that. That's what we do in Geo.
I think to that point, I agree with that, but the way we can further filter this down is by milestones. So once everybody agrees and adds comments and we come up with severity, then I think the next step would be to add a milestone to it, whether it's backlog because it turns out it's not that big of a deal, or like the next milestone, so that then we can further filter this down to only see ones that, what is it? That's milestone equals none, right? So we can add another filter to see which ones we haven't triaged yet. Okay, that makes sense to me.
I think the only thing I'm going to say is, and that's maybe just me, I am unwilling to put milestones out there that are like 4 milestones off. For me, milestones are at most the next milestone or maybe the one after, because other than that, it gets really, it looks as if something is going to happen, but reality usually differs, right? So I think we need to be honest with ourselves, right? If something is not as important to be done in the next 2 milestones, we shouldn't forget about it, but assigning it to like 14.7 is not going to do anybody any favors.
Yeah, is there, I know in some projects there's an awaiting further demand milestone. So I'm trying to figure out a way to make sure that some of these issues don't fall into gaps, right? So that we can look past the ones that have already been triaged and then figure out what needs to be prioritized. And maybe it just means that there's 2 different boards that we need to create. So one for triaging and one for scheduling. Open to suggestions though.
I wonder how that sort of relates to the infradev process that we also have. Because what we're talking now is that we as a group look at these and sort of help finding the priority, severity, solutions and all that. Would they still go to the infradev meeting and being like further triage there, or do we stop that from happening, or how does it go together?
If I recall from the meeting, they have yet another board that they look at, and if they're in the left column where they don't have like a workflow breakdown to them, then there will be further triage. Like they want to make sure that it's scheduled and assigned to a team and in some kind of workflow validation. So if it doesn't have a workflow label to it, then yeah, it will be triaged yet again, or at least asked for assignment.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I mean, what we're saying then is we basically shortcut that bigger process and try to catch those things before they go into that process, or add those details and maybe schedule that for our team, maybe find another team. And if we don't manage to do that, it goes to the infradev process.
Yep.
Okay. Actually, similar to Yannis and I discussed, and it's on the agenda on the 4th, point 4. Because we often have these issues, like, for example, Jose, you often find like index suggestions and stuff like that. How do we treat those? And then we also find issues that are kind of low hanging sometimes not. We were wondering if we should have a sort of a separate label for that, or they should also go to the infradev for this process. How do we work with those?
So what's the purpose of the proposed triage label? Is that for things that have been triaged or to be triaged?
To be triaged.
Okay. I think that's implied by what we were talking about earlier. If it doesn't have a milestone and it's on the board and it has a database label, then it's something we should look at. But I think there's still that gap in there.
But those are also for anything that is not infradev. So not everything is infradev. We have a lot of operational issues, like Andreas found a page that was taking 6 seconds, with a query that was taking 6 seconds. This is something that someone has to address, and we have to figure out, are we going to address it, or are we going to send it to the feature team that is responsible for issues, for example. So we have to gather those all those inbound requests somewhere, so that we can quickly triage them. And because at the moment we only triage infradev issues and bug issues. So maybe the idea there was, should we have a new label, maybe better named? Also, with the for the infradev board, can I ask a question? Sorry for taking us back there. Should we check for database or for group database? Because a lot of things are database related, but are not group database anymore. So for example, there we have already there are already 2 issues that other groups have taken over. So they are already triaged and assigned to other groups. So we are checking group database. Am I right?
Yeah, sometimes issues come in with the database label that have not yet been assigned to group database yet, right? So I think those would filter them out if we looked at group database.
Okay, okay.
So what we basically want is a set of labels that indicates that we as a group want to look at this, right? I wonder if sort of the combination of infradev and database is the right thing.
Well, in which project are we creating this? Is in the infrastructure? Because usually everything that I work, I have the tags of data stores and database. So we're starting to mix things. So I don't want to pollute your board as well.
Well,
I think those issues
the
are on
infradev they're different projects too, which is the other problem. So we have different projects, different labels, different criteria for looking at all these things. So I think ultimately we're going to have multiple boards, but narrowing down how we view these boards and in what order is what we're trying to do here.
And something that we had recently was, I think I was creating an issue. I was adding the infradev label to it, and then it was sort of removed later on with the comment saying that, well, if this is something that we encounter on the development side, then this doesn't qualify for infradev. So that made me wonder, like, if we wanted to use that label more, can we put infradev on that, and should we be doing that?
Infradev is has a very specific connotation. So if we want to triage, there are 3 inbound requests for, maybe it's a request for help, maybe it's a request for anything. And that's the question there. Should we have a database triage label that will help us, have a queue of things to triage and then move them in our workflow forward? Have them ready for development or send them to another team or schedule them.
Right. Why don't we have a database triage label, and if there is an infradev issue that has a database side and sort of needs input from the database side, we can also add that label to it, right? So there can be infradev issues with the database triage label that we will be looking at, and there can be other issues as well with the same label that we look at. Would that make sense?
I think adding a specific database triage label might be redundant with the current infradev process. I think if it has the infradev label on it and database label on it, it needs to be triaged, and that's how it will be treated in the meeting. If it doesn't have that workflow breakdown or team assignment to it, they will assume that it needs to be triaged and assigned to someone.
I agree with Craig, but those are 2 different discussions. So the one is the infradev discussion where we agree, okay, we're going to check all infradev and database, and those are inbound requests from the infrastructure team. And then there are all the other requests that may also come from development teams and feature teams. And that's the discussion about, I think, the database triage also, where we cannot assign an infradev there.
Right. Yeah, and typically, a lot of times those will come through with just the database label, right? So you're proposing that we add, there's only 1,000 of them. Proposing that we add another label on there that says like database triage, and then is that what you're saying? So that we prioritize those to be triaged?
This will be for us. So those are the ones that we recognize that we want to triage or we have to triage. I don't know, Fabian.
Yeah, so for some context, what we're doing here is a euphemism for created the label and looking occasionally at it, right? Is I have a scoped label named geo triage, right? So That's something that I often apply to things when I'm like, I don't really know what to do with this thing. We need to think about it, right? Before we do anything further with it. That is mainly something internal to Geo, right? And I think here what Andreas is proposing is saying, for any issue, right, where the database team needs to actually look at it and decide what to do with it, right? Is it a bug? Is it a problem? Is it something we need to do? Whatever that triaging means, we should have that label. And so the other advantage this has for me, and this is sort of a wider discussion that we don't need to go into, is I also have a geo active label that's also scoped. And those are the things that are actually being worked on by the team at this moment in time. That allows me to have a Kanban style board for Geo, where you can go and you can see what is all the stuff that the team is actually working on, and then they have workflow labels. That's a little bit of a hack, because it avoids having a board with 900 open issues in the open column, right? Because I find that very disruptive. And you have like 9,000 in the closed column, 900 in the open column, and stuff in between. It's super messy. And so I use these scoped geo labels for that purpose. That's maybe something that the database team could do. Okay. Consequently, I think what that would mean for InfraDev is, as I understand it, that doesn't need to change at all, right? You would have InfraDev plus database. That is something we look at, but we may then want to apply the triage label on top of that, right? For us to actually keep track of it. So that's something that I've done in the past. Works pretty well, but it's an internal meaning to navigate our gigantic, messy label space.
I'd say let's take this to an MR that maybe we throw up on our database team page, and we can discuss the mechanics on how we want to do this so that we can get back to the actual issues and why Jose is here to see if there's any burning issues that we need to be working on now. And then as a team, we can figure out how we function on triaging incoming issues from every possible source. So if nobody else gets to it, I'll throw something together later on today. Get back to the list. So these are the 9 that we have open. I don't think that there's anything new. I think that we've looked at all of these so far, but Jose, please correct me if I'm wrong, if there's anything that we should be prioritizing right now.
No, I did just one investigation about a peak yesterday that I think was a select for update that we already was in our radar, I guess. I was investigating a bit today, or talking the last days with Yanis about the marginalia, because we are like somehow aggregating it, so it's harder for us to trace. I'm investigating what can we do there to get more information from which host or from where it comes, these kind of requests. But I see some drawbacks if we do that as well, but let's see what we can find new.
So I think the InfraDev portion of the meeting is covered. Then if you don't have anything else, Jose, you feel free to leave anytime.
Okay, thanks. I have a call soon, so appreciate it.
Yep, thanks, Jose. Appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, Andreas, I believe this is your topic number 2 here.
Yeah, probably everybody has seen that already, right? So there is a proposal for how we can do database migration testing or database testing in general. I've linked these things again if you haven't seen. So there's a code change, basically the MR, and also the recording from yesterday, and the README also has some details. And this is kind of, so before we had that, we had this single server setup that we were using, and it had like network isolation to some extent, and that was sort of a manual approach to this, and works fine for us supposedly, but this sort of takes it one step further and would allow us to run this on any CI pipeline without handing out access to the database. So that's the benefit, and I think we can do a lot more things there. Like if you saw that, what gets back to the MR as a feedback, currently just has the timings for the migrations, but we can add so much more useful details to that if we go that way. I think that this would be very usable. The question, I think, is like, do we want to take that approach? And if yes, I think it will be important to get a security review on that, because this is the biggest concern that we have with these approaches is like, how do we run things on the production database? Perhaps we can engage the security team on that, and then as a next step, yeah, iron out all those kinks that still has. It's just an MVC right now.
So my question there, is this something, if it was all working, is this something any DB maintainer can run if they have the correct permissions?
This is something that everybody can run. So as a developer, you come in, you push your migration to CI, and then this kicks off automatically. Once it's done, you get back feedback on the MR. So this is not even like limited to maintainers, but basically everybody can use it.
How do the permissions?
But we're going to start with maintainers.
Okay.
As an MVC, am I right, Andreas? And then we're going to. But yeah, let's see the security.
It depends on the security. Yeah. What did you mean, Craig?
The security piece of it. So when they're running against the production data, in what role is the pipeline running that can actually get the access to the production data?
So basically this doesn't run in the regular CI pipeline. So in regular CI, there is only a job that sort of kicks off another pipeline on the ops instance. So this is a separate private instance. And this is the one that we care about from a security perspective. This also executes the code. It has network limitation on the Docker level. And the important thing is kind of it's kind of this middle ground between we still allow you to run any code on the production database, so arbitrary code. You can send any migration, any code basically, and we execute that for you. What we don't allow you to get is basically the output of that execution, and we also don't allow any communication coming out of that Docker container, let's say. And the only thing that comes out of that is an artifact where we, at the moment, we basically just keep track of the runtime for migrations. And this is a JSON file that comes out of that pipeline. We use that JSON file to report those details back on the original MR. But this is exactly what we should get reviewed from a security perspective.
Yeah. Well, this was the goal for the migration testing, right? This is exactly what we wanted to do. So this is fantastic.
This is 5 steps in one. So and what we wanted to ask is that if everyone, so think about it and check it, if everyone agrees that this is the way to go, we will also update the APIC and the whole, we are going to close a bunch of other issues and keep that, because that is the speed lane to the end.
And it's sort of overtaking the idea of working on the anonymization part, right? Which is a really large topic if you think about it.
Yeah,
so if
I'm very pleased with that specifically, because I think the whole let's anonymize our production data, that is something in my experience you really, really, really want to avoid unless you really have to, because it's complicated and it involves lawyers, and that usually is not something that you want to do.
And it's something you have to continue to tune forever, right? So it's the unending gift.
Yeah, I had a couple of high-level questions on this. So the first one is, I'm quite excited about this because it feels like if our intention and goal was to provide people better information on their migrations on production-ready data, this feels like a more automated way of doing that. So we should theoretically catch a lot of the failed migrations before they hit production. So that feels like a huge step forward, right? Especially if it's in CI and everybody can do it. Quite exciting in my mind. So I'm taking the product hat on. It is so exciting that I'm wondering, isn't this something that many of our customers would also vastly benefit from? As in, if GitLab, and I have no idea how that would even work, right? But if GitLab had a feature, right, that would allow you to essentially test your database migrations efficiently against production data somehow, right? I know this uses Postgres AI, right? There's a lot of unknowns here, but I can see this being very compelling because this is a problem that I think many organizations have, right? So I think this is maybe something we should think about and say, like, if this is something that works well for us, what can we do, or could we even, maybe it's impossible, but is this something that others, our customers, can benefit from as well? And then this is, to me, is a typical sort of premium or enterprise level feature. Right? If you have a significant database, you have many developers, you need to do this. In my mind, this is something that people find, this has enough value maybe to be shipped, but I don't know how that would work, right? But it's sort of my mind immediately. I saw that and was just like, I think this is really an interesting feature, right? And currently we're posting this as a comment, right, in the discussion on the MR. But imagine, you had a sort of a little tab in the MR that says like, okay, migration report, right? Bam, 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 everything passed,
Totally agree with you. Yeah, Yanis and I, we were just talking about similar things. And wasn't there didn't we also talk sometime about dog fooding database reviews and what we can do?
Yeah, exactly. That was the discussion I think Yanis and I had at the end of last year, is to say like, maybe I think this is also interesting. It's like, these are features, right? They are actual features for developers, right? And for people who work on other things. So maybe database reviewing, right, and doing these kinds of things is a category, because this is a thing that I could see being quite compelling. Maybe there are other things as well, right? But something like that is probably quite valuable.
Yeah, and it's not only about migrations. For example, currently we want developers to come back with query examples, with plans, and all that. And this is similarly manual, like testing migrations. Yeah. And what if, for example, you had a tab in your MR where you can add those query examples, and then the automation kicks in, grabs those, runs them on the production database, comes back with the query plans, and that would be super cool.
Yeah, I think so too. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm quite excited about personally, because I think this is, these are things that I think are high value for us because they increase developer productivity, right? If people are not busy copy pasting code, they are busy actually doing their jobs, right? Which is developing features mostly. And so this stuff is quite valuable. And you can easily see how this scales as a feature category from free to premium, right? You can easily see sort of people starting off, right? And you get maybe your explain statements, right? And that's already pretty valuable. And then all of a sudden you start seeing like, well, but there are all of these other things I want to do, right? Until you arrive at maybe something like this, which is quite valuable. So I think it's a really cool category idea.
Do we have an epic for all these ideas already?
I want to create one.
Okay. I'm just tracking the follow-up items we need to do here.
But yeah, those are amazing ideas. And we are the customers for this, and we know the value. So we are feeling the pain. This is one of those cases where we know the pain of having to do that, and how useful it is. I don't know how many companies need that, but from my experience, every team needs something like that. The moment they have they are working with databases. So yeah, it's
I wonder how sort of general that is. Like, it makes sense for database topic, or a database review category makes sense. But is there even a way to generalize this more? Like, are there other types of sort of reviews that you would want to do where you have those things like artifacts like a query or a migration that you want to feed into a separate system, and that gives you feedback on the MR. I wonder if sort of this can even be generalized to different areas.
I think immediately memory comes to mind, right? Like performance concerns, right? It's like we, I think we talked about that earlier this week, where on a general level, right now it's very hard to know what feature and what change in code contributes how much to specific memory usage and how that's impacted. And you can see, I think, different dimensions of what a change actually does, right, to your system, whatever that is, right? And getting these reports out, and also sort of automatically passing certain parameters, I think this can be quite valuable. And yeah.
Like we do for security profiling. So maybe it's a memory profiling. And then, but yeah, one step at a time. So
exactly.
For example, we have to, I think that if we could ever do something like that, it will be an MVC with Postgres. A lot of people use Postgres because this is specific to Postgres, and then we would have to think about,
yeah, and I think that there are obviously many questions here as well in terms of security, and I think this requires like Postgres AI and thin cloning capabilities, and how would you even provision something like that, and so on and so forth. I understand all of that, but I think if we think big a little bit, right, what we just discussed is quite appealing, right? And I think it also, these are things I think that will appeal to the product organization, because they're not just right? They're not operational questions. They are forward-looking improvements that actually help people. Cool. Sorry, I didn't want to sidetrack that, but I think it's very exciting.
Yeah, I think, and it actually leads into, if I can make that go away, number 3. If we have that epic and the ideas of feature development that we want to work on, then we can link to that doc to say, if given more time, we can work on these features, which will lead to potential sales, I suppose, what they're looking for. Or given our current scale and level of interruptions, we'll never get to these things. However we need to put it to pose it more positively for that staffing pitch. So.
Yep. No, and I think this is I've revisited this already. Janis gives that feedback. You can look at it. In essence, this is a high-level request for some additional team members for database. Please feel free to contribute, read it. Right? I think it's important to me that whatever is written in that request reflects everyone's views as to why this is important, right? And not just my view. I've revisited this a little bit in the morning by also highlighting sort of the types of things that have been done in 2021 already, right? And why they're valuable. And then saying, okay, but at the scale that we are right now, right? And GitLab's growth trajectory, we're kind of blocked, right? We cannot continue doing some of those things, right? And if we have concrete examples like this one in an epic, we can say like, hey, we can't actually do stuff like that, but it's really cool, right? That's also a positive spin, right? Because there are 2 aspects, right? You can say, well, something will topple over and that's going to be bad, which I think is true. But I think there's also the other thing is like, hey, we can't actually do all of those things and they're great and they're potentially going to generate revenue. And I think if we have both arguments, and that's, I think, quite compelling, right? Because you can say we reduce risk and we have potentially forward-looking improvements that you should care about. That feels quite nice.
Cool. All right, next one. Did we cover all of this?
Yes,
Janis. Yeah, but this is this was not about infradev only. It was a separate thing. And what I think that what Fabian said about what they're doing in Geo sounds pretty interesting. So it's something similar to that. So not only for infradev. So yeah, we can think about it. we have those issues, for example, and we have to think, how fast can we decide, respond, and move them forward. And that's how this discussion started with Andreas.
So we actually have this issue to discuss and our overall team processes, and one of them is actually the proposal that Fabian had put forward about how Geo does their Kanban style boards. So prior to actually having an MR, if we want to discuss asynchronously, I would just say add comments to this topic so we can continue.
Yeah, and I think to me, and I've said this several times, I don't care that much about a specific process. I care about us being comfortable with it and getting value out of it. I've worked in different processes in different positions. In GitLab, I find the Geo process that we use pretty helpful for developers in particular, because it means there is a single board, and that single board has a static link. It does not change, right? You can always go to that board and you see what's happening. And that was one of the biggest issues I had at GitLab, is I didn't know where all of the information was with milestones and whatnot. And I like the workflow labels because they give a more detailed overview of where you are at in the cycle of actually building something. So yeah.
Okay. And then database reindexing, Andreas.
Before we get into that, sorry to circle back, but I was wondering, how do we get the security review going? Is there somebody dedicated to this? I saw somebody was looking into that topic already, but I wouldn't.
So I believe it's Andrew Kelly.
He had a comment, I think, in the anonymization issue. Let me find it.
Oh, that's one. Yeah, I was looking for that.
Yeah, so and Craig told him that, we are going to add you. Let me find it.
So he's copied on all of our planning issues. So he is the security counterpart for enablement.
Should we, or should I reach out to him about that topic?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Cool. Sorry, go ahead.
Should we start restructuring the epic, or should we wait?
Why don't we wait for some initial feedback on the security side? Because that's kind of what makes this fly or not, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Database reindexing, just an update on that. So before the holidays, we had a couple of sort of semi-automated runs. So I was, those things were starting automatically, but I was looking at them actively in the morning. But that wasn't really needed at all. Like nothing happened very smoothly. So basically, there's a bit of discussion going on right now because the database size is growing and we're basically don't have enough free space anymore. And that's why we're kind of interested in doing more database reindexing. And I'm suggesting that instead of doing that manually, we sort of spend the time getting the automation out so that this can run continuously, basically. So this is the last issue I linked in there. This is currently waiting for the SRE team about the Grafana integration. So that needs a couple of secrets to be added to the chef configuration. That's what we're waiting for there. I've pinged Alberto on that. But once that is done, we can basically discuss the schedule for the reindexing. So when this should run. I remember a discussion where we were talking about running this on the weekends or running this during the day, and there is benefits and drawbacks for both, basically. So that's what we would have to discuss, and then likely what is missing is a run book, basically, for the on-call how do you interact with that? How do you stop things if things go wrong? Stuff like that. But other than that, it's basically ready and waiting for SRE at the moment.
What you mentioned earlier that we're running out of database space to run the reindex. What size are we at now?
Still somewhere around 8 terabytes.
Okay.
So that's fine, and we have like I think we're at roughly 90% utilization.
Yeah.
But we don't want to cross that threshold too much. And but also the reindexing, I mean, this is going to help a lot. If we manage to remove load continuously, then that's a lot. So there's, I think, a terabyte or so that we can shave off overall. But sometimes we have to increase the disk size, I guess.
Yeah.
In any case.
And then are we going to release in a couple of releases, enable it also for self-hosted after we feel confident?
Yeah, that would be nice. That should be the goal. Yeah.
Oh, something that comes to mind. We're done on that topic. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. Just popped into my head. Have we addressed all of the integer overflow issues? Not yet.
Yannis is working on that.
Yannis is working on it.
So we just merged the first set of tools, the first set of migrations, helpers, and one of the next days we will start the migration for the biggest table, the epics table. It will take one release, and then next release, during that time we'll maybe have to add some additional migration helpers. We'll have to think about it. So this is done, and we're waiting for it to go to production. So then we are going to release the step one, which will start the migration. And also this milestone, we should add any other remaining migration helpers that will enable step two next milestone.
Thank you. It just popped into my mind, you know, with this slight sort of like spine quiver, you know, I'm just like, oh, did I forget about this? And
we have a dashboard after Andreas update, so we can also check live how things are working.
Super, thanks for the update. Yeah, you can tell I'm totally on top of things, you know, after the vacation. To give you an example of that, I made coffee in the kitchen, like before the meeting. They poured all of the coffee grounds into my cup rather than into the coffee maker, right? So I'm doing well.
The worst thing I have done was that I have put, how do you call the black coffee, the French coffee, in my espresso machine, where it's roasting, where I'm roasting. And I was like, oh my God. And then I had to clean it for half an hour.
No, what happens to me, or it has happened to me at least twice, is I have coffee with milk, but no sugar. And instead of actually pouring milk into my coffee in the morning, I put in orange juice, and then I like had a sip, and I was just like, "This is terrible." It's like, why is this happening? It's like, and if your brain does not process the difference between, you know, a milk carton and the translucent yellow shiny orange carton, you know that you shouldn't make any important decisions on that day, right? It's like.
Oh, so I have to also share a very personal story now that we're live. And when I was a baby, my grandma, by mistake, she had an eye surgery, and she put ouzo instead of water in my milk. And and thank God, because, so she gave it to me, and I spit it out, but yeah, she gave me, instead of giving me milk, she gave me ouzo. Ouzo is a local Greek type of like a very distilled wine.
Yes. Yeah, well, I'm glad you spit it out, and I hope it was by accident.
Yeah, no, it was not good quality. If the story was with a malt whiskey, I would be ashamed if I had split it.
All right. topics we need to cover today? Cool. Well, I have to run. I don't know about everybody else, but I need to drop off. So it's good seeing everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, Happy New Year, Patrick.
Yeah, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
We have to stop recording.
Yeah, I can do that.